Hello friends, welcome to Behind the Shadows, a new way of telling stories.
The sun shone brightly over the abandoned field as I drove with my friends. The weather was perfect for an adventure. Did you guys see the glass house that just appeared out of nowhere? I asked, excitement bubbling within me. Mark, the boldest of the group, replied with a laugh, of course. They say it's haunted. Let's go check it out, it's our chance to see something incredible. Sarah, always the most sensitive, grimaced. I don't know, guys. This ghost story makes me uncomfortable. What if it's not just a legend? Oh, come on, Sarah. Don't be such a scaredy cat, Lisa retorted, rolling her eyes. It's just a house. What could possibly happen? With every kilometer we drove, the anticipation grew. When we finally arrived, the sight of the house left me speechless. Its glass walls reflected the sunlight in 1,000 colors, creating a mesmerizing spectacle. Wow, it's beautiful, I murmured as I approached the entrance. Beautiful, but strange, Sarah commented, watching the distorted reflections dance across the surfaces. It feels kind of alive. Don't be ridiculous, David said, trying to dismiss her concerns. Let's go inside. What are we waiting for? Ignoring Sarah's warnings, we pushed through the door. As soon as we crossed the threshold, a chill ran down my spine. The door slammed shut behind us with a resonant thud, and a strange sensation began to settle in the air. Hello? Is anyone here? Tom shouted, his voice echoing uncomfortably. The environment around us started to shift. The reflections in the glass became warped, as if the house was enjoying our presence. This isn't normal, Sarah whispered, her worried gaze darting around. I'm starting to really dislike this. Let's explore. We can't turn back now, Mark insisted, but Sarah's unease lingered in the air. The silence was broken by whispers that seemed to come from all directions. Did you guys hear that? Lisa asked, clearly frightened. Yeah, what was that? David replied, his heart racing. Tension built up, and I felt that something was about to happen. The house, which had once seemed like a place of curiosity, now felt like a prison, and the real adventure was just beginning. The atmosphere inside the glass house was suffocating, as if the air was charged with static electricity. I looked at my friends, who were now dispersing, each drawn by an invisible force. I moved toward a mirror that shimmered intensely, as if it were calling to me. As I approached, I realized that it wasn't just my reflection staring back, it was a distortion of who I truly was. Mark, come see this. Tom shouted from another room, but I could barely hear his words. The mirror began to reveal my insecurities, the feeling of never being good enough, of failing in my ambitions. Magnificently cruel, the image of myself had turned into a grotesque version, a monster that accused me. You are a coward. You always have been. Echoed a voice, and I shrank, feeling the weight of that accusation crush me. I wanted to scream, but the words were lodged in my throat. The mirror was draining my confidence like a vampire, and I didn't know how to escape it. From the other side of the house, I heard Lisa scream. Mark! Help! The desperation in her voice pulled me back to reality. I rushed toward the source of the sound, but before I could reach her, I found myself in a room filled with children's toys. It was a scene that seemed to have leapt out of a nightmare, and in the center of it, there was a mirror reflecting an image of Lisa, but not the Lisa I knew. She was frozen, staring at a younger version of herself, surrounded by shadows that danced around her. No, no, no. She screamed, but her voice sounded muffled. Get out of me. Lisa. What's happening? I shouted, but she didn't seem to hear me. The image in the mirror was consuming her, and I didn't know how to help. Meanwhile, Tom seemed to have found something as well. He came running in, his eyes wide. Mark, you won't believe what I saw. He was pale, his body trembling. It was me, but it wasn't me. It was a dark man challenging me. He said I was selfish. I don't know what to do. We need to regroup, find the others. I suggested, but my mind was tangled with the visions. The house was feasting on our weaknesses, feeding off our fears. What was this place? A trap that converged our insecurities into a single terrifying reality. Come on, we need to get out of here, Tom said, and we started running through the house, but with each step, the feeling of despair intensified. The echo of our voices mixed with the whispers of the house, creating a chorus of anguish that followed us around every corner. The separation was tearing us apart, and the fear of never escaping began to settle in. The tension hung in the air like a dense fog. We gathered in a dark corner of the glass house, our faces reflected in the shiny walls appearing distorted, as if the house itself were watching us. I looked at my friends, trying to decipher the emotions that shone in their eyes. What was that we saw? I asked, my voice trembling.
I saw things I shouldn't have seen, Lisa said, her gaze lost.
It was like the mirror was showing me my past, things I thought I had forgotten. Her trembling hands clutched her shirt as her breathing quickened. Calm down, Lisa. We're in this together, I tried to comfort her, but the truth was I was terrified too. Tom, who had been standing apart, shook his head. Whatever this is, it's real. The house is playing with our minds. He seemed more tense than ever, as if on the brink of a breakdown. We need to get out of here, David suggested, his voice steady, but the expression on his face revealed otherwise. The group moved toward the entrance, but when we arrived, the door wouldn't budge. I pounded on it forcefully, but there was no sign of escape. What's happening? I shouted, frustration taking over me. It's the house. It doesn't want us to leave, Sarah said, her voice low but filled with despair. It's feeding on our fears. Look at the mirrors. And that's when I realized. The walls reflected not just our images, but scenes from our worst moments. I saw my childhood, a version of myself at 10 years old, alone and scared in a dark room. No. This isn't real. I yelled, but the image remained, laughing at me. We need to stay united. David shouted, but the house's pressure seemed to pull us apart, as if each of us was being dragged into the abyss of our own insecurities. Fear spread among us, and the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. We can't let this control us. Let's fight, I said, trying to muster courage. But as I spoke, I realized each of us was battling an internal struggle, and the glass house was just beginning to manipulate our deepest fears. Mark's collapse was abrupt and unexpected. When I regained consciousness, the last thing I saw was his look of pain before everything went dark. Now, I was alone in an endless corridor, surrounded by mirrors that reflected not only my image but a distorted version of myself. That Mark, with his vacant gaze and twisted mouth, stared at me with a contempt I had never seen before. Coward, he whispered, echoing like a scream in my mind. You've always been like this. Who are you? I stammered, but the only response was a low laugh that reverberated through the walls. Fear began to swell within me, an oppressive sensation that made me want to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped, and the glass walls seemed to close in slowly, as if the house was relishing my despair. Meanwhile, Sarah and Lisa were in a different room, filled with framed photographs. The smell of mildew and the dim light made the environment even more stifling. Look at this, Sarah, Lisa exclaimed, pointing to a particular photo. It's Mrs. Jenkins. She disappeared years ago. Yes, and here are others, Sarah replied, feeling a chill run down her spine as she recognized other familiar faces. These people. They never left the house. Despair began to consume them, and Sarah tried to stay calm. We need to find the boys and get out of here. On the other side, Tom and David wandered through a maze of mirrors, where the walls seemed to shift with every step they took. Mark! Are you here? Tom shouted, but his voice echoed and faded into the air. With each turn, they were confronted by distorted visions of their lives. David saw himself losing his job, his girlfriend leaving him, and loneliness wrapping around him like a thick fog. This isn't real, David. Tom yelled, but the visions of his failures followed him like a shadow. We need to get out. Where's Mark? Panic began to settle in between them, and the horrifying images intensified. The house was playing with their minds, forcing each of them to face their deepest fears. As they tried to regroup, the feeling that something terrible was about to happen hung in the air like a storm ready to break. The only thing they could do was continue their search, despite the terror surrounding them, unaware that the real battle was just beginning. The tension in the air was almost palpable when we reunited in the small glass corridor. The light reflecting off the walls seemed to dance around us, creating shadows that appeared to have a life of their own. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our quickening breaths. I looked at each of my friends' faces and realized that distrust had already taken root in our hearts. We need to get out of here, Mark said, his voice trembling. We're wasting time. Let's find a way out. His determination, however, felt fragile, like a thread of glass about to shatter. You don't understand, Lisa interrupted, her eyes wide with despair. This house. It's alive. It's watching us, absorbing us. We can't trust each other. Her words echoed like a scream in the void, and I could see the panic rising in her eyes. "Lisa, you're overreacting," I tried to reassure her. "It's just the pressure. We're all scared." But deep down, I knew something was truly wrong. The house seemed to feed on our fear, distorting our perceptions and making us question each other's sanity. "We need to stick together," David said, appealing to reason. "If we split up, we'll end up lost forever." But as we spoke, the house seemed to toy with our minds, distorting reality and creating labyrinths of uncertainty. Then, in a moment of desperation, David looked at a door they had previously overlooked. "Maybe if I try to open it, it could be the way out," he suggested, though his tone was hesitant. Before we could intervene, he lunged toward the door. "No, David," I shouted, but it was too late. As he touched the doorknob, a wave of energy pulsed through the house. The ground began to shake, and the glass walls contorted, grotesquely reflecting our deepest fears. "What have you done?" Tom shouted as the house began to transform, intensifying the feeling of claustrophobia. The scene grew increasingly chaotic, and I realized we were at the mercy of something greater than ourselves. "There must be a way out," I cried, but the reality around us had become a nightmare. The house, now a voracious entity, seemed to revel in our despair. With each passing second, distrust grew, and I understood that we were not only fighting against the house but also against ourselves. The struggle for survival had become an internal battle, and the shadows that surrounded us were no longer mere reflections but manifestations of our deepest fears. I was paralyzed, surrounded by glass walls that reflected not just my fears but also a distorted reality of everything that could happen. The images that emerged on the shiny surfaces were a deterioration of those we had already witnessed. Each of us was confronted with what we feared most, and the psychological pressure pushed us to our limits. "Mark, are you okay?" Sarah's voice sounded distant, as if she were speaking from another world. I could see her, but I couldn't respond. The visions were so overwhelming that I could barely distinguish her words. "Look, the house is trying to divide us. We need to stick together." The tension escalated with every passing second, and the house seemed to feed on our despair. Tom, agitated, began pacing back and forth. "We need to get out of here. This thing isn't real. It's all an illusion." He was right, but how could we tell the illusion from reality? "I can't take it anymore," Lisa screamed, her eyes filled with tears. "Everything is falling apart. We're all doomed." I tried to move closer to her, but an image reflected in one of the mirrors made her scream even louder. It was a reflection of her childhood, a moment of pain she couldn't forget. Then, something changed. Sarah pointed to a door at the back of the room, a soft light emanating from it. "There. Let's go." Desperation united us in a frantic rush. But as soon as we reached the door, the house began to tremble. The glass walls contorted, distorting the light and creating shadows that danced around us. "No. We can't stop now," David shouted, his voice echoing amid the chaos. Finally, I managed to reach the doorknob. I was about to turn it when the house let out a deafening roar. The walls closed in, and the door seemed to pull away. "No. We have to get out," I yelled, but in an instant, reality warped once again. When we finally managed to open the door, another glass house awaited us. It was identical to the original, but now we were merely spectators of a new group of curious individuals entering, unaware. A chill ran down my spine. A whisper echoed in my mind, "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." And then, one of the familiar voices stood out among the others. I always knew. The house is an extension of who we are, a manifestation of our deepest fears. My heart raced. What did that mean?
Leave your comment and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy and see other stories on the channel. See you in the next story, if you dare.